one?
19.
Oh,
We are 19.
run down here.
Welcome to Lord Troop Tower.
Right.
So kami ngayong
Good afternoon,
Saturday.
everyone. Welcome to Longthorpe Tower.
Thank you. Thank you.
There's many more of you than we normally have in this very small room, as you can imagine. Usually our maximum is 12. So the first thing I would ask you is please do not lean against the walls, because these paintings that you are looking at here, or will be explained to you, are very, very old. They were painted over 700 years ago.
Wow.
The tower itself has only 2 rooms open to the public. This is the main room, and I'll spend most of the time explaining this to you. But there is an upper room. Through that door there are steep stairs, stone. It's not dark, it's not frightening, but there was nothing up in there. There's no paintings up there. What we have up there is just some boards and a table and things, just to sort of set a scene about medieval England. But there are no paintings actually up there. So you may want to go up there after I've given the talk, or you may not, depending on how you feel about dark spaces and stairs. It's entirely up to you. But what we want to concentrate on are the paintings here, because you are looking at the best preserved medieval wall paintings in a secular setting, that is in a non-religious, non-church setting, probably in the whole of Western Europe, that were painted at about the time and the date that I'm going to tell you about, which is over 700 years ago. Okay. Now, what you are seeing, unfortunately, and of course it is a dull day today, and we can't use too much light in here because of the paintings, but what you are seeing is, if you like, the undercoat, what's left of the paintings. If you had walked in here 700 years ago, what you would have seen would have been this whole room covered in bright, bright, bright colours, reds and blues and greens, and possibly gold or silver leaf. Okay, so really, really bright. And you would only have been able to enter this room if you were a special person. Because two things. First of all, the only way in is in that door marked private, through that door there, okay? Now that door leads to the manor house. Now the manor house is still there. It has been knocked about a bit. It's not quite as it was 700 years ago, but you can see the manor house was here. The 3 stories of this tower were here, and the manor house was built in 1265. The tower was added on about 35 years later. And why did he add it on? A gentleman called Robert de Thorpe. He added it on to say, look at me, I've got money, I've got prestige, I can afford to build 3 stories. Bear in mind that at the time, all the other houses around here would have been single stories, hovel basically, with thatching perhaps, very low level cottages, okay, made of dirt, made of thatch. Here we have 3 stories. You would see nothing taller if you stood at the very top of the tower, which you could do in 1300. You could stand at the top of the tower and you could see nothing until you saw the great west door of Peterborough Abbey. Now it's now Peterborough Cathedral. I don't know, have you been to the cathedral? Yes. Now, it was being built in 1300, and if you stood at the top of our tower here, you could see them building it. So it's about 2 miles, and you could easily, because the trees weren't there, the other buildings weren't there, you would see them actually building the great frontage of the Abbey. And that would be also bright, bright colours. We forget that medieval people liked colour and they painted the whole of the front of the abbey. Now we see it just as a white building, beautiful but white, but it would have been full of colour. So you come through that door marked private, and as I say, the manor house is still there, but it's in private hands, it doesn't belong to the nation. And the reason you have to come through there is because there was not a door here. This door was put in much, much later. There's a bit of a dispute about when it was put in. Some people believe it was put in as late as the 1950s. It would have been a lancet window exactly the same as that one. So if you look carefully, you can see where they've put 3 bits of wood in, taken the window out and just knocked the door in. Now, under building regulations now, you'd have to have an RSJ and all sorts of things. You just couldn't do that anymore. But that was done, and it allows public access, but it has, unfortunately, chopped off even more of our paintings, and it doesn't give you the idea that this had balance and harmony, this room. The other thing about this room, before I start to talk about the paintings, is just behind you, if you swivel in your chair, you can see a chimney. A fireplace. A fireplace. You are looking at one of the earliest English chimneys to be built in situ in the whole of the country. So this little tower is very, very special, even though it's so small and in a rather strange, obscure little village now. Okay, so this would have been not only full of colour, but it would have been warm as well. Bear in mind, in the manor house, they would have just had braziers in the middle with a hole in the roof for the smoke to go out. Here we have a chimney. So this bit of the manor house is really important. And as I say, the gentleman who built this manor house and built the tower was a gentleman called Robert de Thorpe. We are called Longthorpe. Robert de Thorpe, and he was finance director of the abbey. He was steward of the abbey, so he had a very prestigious position. He was Sir. He was made a Sir in 1320. Okay. So, you come through the door, it's warm, it's colourful, and you've been invited here as a special guest. When you would have been 700 years ago. Now, I'm going to explain all about the paintings to you. We have a range of paintings, and that's what makes this special. We do have religious paintings, and I understand you are a religious group, mainly. So obviously I will explain about the religious paintings. But the beauty of this room is that we have secular paintings, non-religious paintings. We have philosophy paintings, we have nature paintings, we have all sorts of things in this one room, and that's what makes it unique. In England, we do not have very many religious paintings left. Now, I don't know if they explained to you about that in the cathedral, but you know we had the Reformation in England, and the Catholic Church was disestablished. The Protestant Church of England came in, and consequently a lot of the religious paintings and iconography were destroyed at that time. And they were mainly destroyed either by smashing statues or whatever, or painting over religious paintings. Every church in England before the Reformation would have been painted inside with saints and angels and, you know, iconography, all sorts of Catholic iconography. Unfortunately, that was all destroyed at the Reformation. We do have 1 or 2 bits left which have been uncovered in various churches, some locally here. And if you go to some churches, you will see, if they've been very high up, say on the ceiling, vaulted angels or something, you might still see them. But most of our religious paintings in churches have gone, unfortunately. And certainly, if you go to St Botolph's for a cup of tea, it's all whitewashed. And this was all whitewashed. But very, very luckily here, they found the paintings, and I'll explain a little bit about that and how they uncovered the paintings in a minute. But I want to tell you about the paintings first because they do need an explanation. Just be careful you're not leaning against the desk, sorry. Right, so let's start with this wall over here first. So if you want to swivel around in your chair.
Yeah.
Now, this is our most famous painting. People come from all over the world to see this one because it is unique in England, and there is only 2 others that we know of in Europe, and neither of them are as big and as good as ours. So it's a unique painting, and it's called The Wheel of the Five Senses. Wow. And it's a philosophy devised by the great Greek philosopher Aristotle. Now, in this painting, each of the animals that you can see round the wheel represents one of our own senses. So we start off with a monkey down the bottom here. And you can see he's got something in his hand, his paw I should say, and he's just about to eat it. So that first sense is taste. Yeah, taste. The second one is a vulture. A vulture, yeah. Now, the medieval people believed that vultures had a very good sense of smell. They thought they smelt the carrion that they feed on from a long distance. Now, we actually know that they've actually got good eyesight, but in medieval times they thought it was smell that a vulture had. So here's our vulture. That's a sense of smell. Anybody like to have a guess what that is?
Timetable.
A spider with a spider. Well done, you. Yes, some people think it looks a bit like a tree trunk, but it is actually a spider. And look very carefully. You can just see that spider in the middle.
Yeah.
Now that is for. Let's have a guess. What other senses have we got?
Touch.
Touch. Exactly. Well done, madam. Yeah. So that's for touch. Now we have people who like spiders, who come here and say that this is the earliest depiction of a spider and a spider's work in the whole of English art. So if you really like spiders, that's the earliest one. Here we have another animal. Anyone to guess on that one? It's rather difficult.
Is it a dog?
It isn't a dog actually, no. No, not a fox. Think hunting. No, not a wolf. The wolves had already been hunted out by. It's actually a wild boar, a wild pig. Can you just see there's a bit of a tusk? You know, they've got biggish tusked wild boars. Now, again, the medieval people thought that a wild boar hears the hunter coming through the forest because he's got big ears and runs off. So that is for hearing.
Whoa.
So we have had taste,
Smell.
touch, hearing. We come to the final one. Sight. That is what? Can anybody say? A bird? What sort of bird? A cockerel. Can you see it's got like a cockerel there? A rooster, a cockerel. He crows the dawn before any of the other animals, so he must have the best eyesight. He sees the sun come up before any of the other animals. So, the five senses are represented by the animals, and this figure behind is not Christ. It is not a king, it is us. Human beings, the top of the animal tree, if you like. We may not have as good a sense as any of these other animals. Our taste or our smell may not be as good, but what do we have? Brain. We have a brain, and therefore we can control our senses more, and we can use our senses more than the other animals. And this is what the great Greek philosopher Aristotle was apparently trying to tell us. Now, Aristotle obviously wrote in Greek, but the medieval people had by this time had people like Sir Thomas Aquinas take the Greek and sort of rewrite it in a more Christian way. And Sir Thomas Aquinas and other great Christian philosophers thought that this was quite a good thing. You know, it's saying that we are humans, we are the sort of top of the tree, if you like. But it's also showing that Sir Thomas thought, perhaps read Greek. You know, he's showing that he's a clever man because he knows about the Greek philosophers and things. So again, it's actually saying, look at me, how clever I am. Look at me, how rich I am. You know, it's all that. Above there, you can see, unfortunately, that the plaster has fallen at different times, and people have, without realising that they were covering the paintings, just covered up with plaster at various times. But here, we have a lovely young man. Now, how do I know he's a young man? Well, because a young man is always depicted with curly hair. No gentlemen have curly hair here. Always curly hair and clean shaven. In medieval art, if you're clean shaven and curly hair, you are a young man. So a teen, late teens probably. And I love to think of this young man in a lovely bright green robe with a red hood. Or sometimes I think of him in a bright red robe with a green hood, you know, depending on how I feel on the day. We don't know what the colours were, but they would have been bright colours. This may well have been a hunting scene, because you can see that there was another gentleman there, you can see his foot, and his foot is a bit bigger than that foot, so I think that was an older man, but unfortunately we've lost most of him. But we've got a little hunting dog here. So, yeah, hunting dog, a terrier. You know, that stance where it's sort of ready to go. And then they've got hunting gloves. He's holding his lovely, probably fawn leather gloves, you know, that lovely beige, soft leather. Yeah. Now, the people who know about fashion tell us that this, what this gentleman is wearing, is the height of fashion in 1320. 1320. That's important to remember because that helps us to date these paintings. Okay, any questions at all before I move on to this next wall? No? Let's turn and face this way then.
Okay.
And okay, now here we have a king sat on his throne. Can you see he's got a crown on there? Can you see he's got sort of curlyish hair? You have to sort of squint a bit and look carefully. He's certainly sat on a lovely throne, and he's got long robes on. Now, I know he's a king, A, because of his crown, and if you walked into our town hall today, you would see a picture of the king. If it was last year, it would have been a picture of the Queen, but, you know, unfortunately the Queen has died, we've now got a king. I don't think there's any picture of him yet with his crown on. But he will be, you know, very. Now here, it also tells me it's the king, because that is a shield. And again, if you look very, very carefully, can you see there's some dark lines there? Now that is the shield of the medieval kings. If you turn around, and I'm going to pass this round so you can all look at it, but that is what it would have looked like, so red and gold basically, with a blue tongue for some reason, I don't quite know why, but the blue tongues. The three lions. Now if any of you follow football or cricket or England still use this, the three lions. So I'll pass that round so you can have a proper look at it. Now, in 1340, our king decided that not only was going to be king of England, he was going to be king of France as well. And he started what was called the 100 Years' War with France. France, and traditionally France and England have always been at war, more or less. Anyway, in 1340, the King of France died. And the King of France's sister was the mother of Edward III, this king here. So he decided he was going to be King of France as well as King of England. Now the fact that at the time you could not actually claim something through your mother's line, it had to be through the father's line, I didn't seem to stop him. He still decided he was going to go to war with France and claim the throne of France. So what did he do? Well, the first thing he did was quarter his shield. Okay? He put the fleur-de-lis of France on his shield. And that he did in 1340, which meant that that picture was painted before 1340. I've told you 1320 for the dress, before 1340 now for the king. Now, when you consider that we've got no written evidence of these paintings, nobody has written Leonardo was here, or... Sorry?
Maybe that's the king, when he was young.
No.
Possibly. I doubt it myself. But he would have worn an even better robe than that. So they're before 1340, these paintings. So we're dating them to a 20-year period between 1320 and before 1340. So do pass that round so you can see. Okay. This other gentleman on this side, it's so badly degraded, his shield and things here, you wouldn't really tell who that is, unfortunately. Below there, can you see this lovely frieze pattern that we've got? We've got one over here as well on that wall. This is to make your walls look a bit like a tapestry. If you were the really richest of the rich, in other words the king and his court, you could have afforded to have a tapestry on your wall. These people perhaps not quite that rich, and that they had to come from France or Flanders, and they cost an awful lot of money. So this gentleman has decided to make his walls look a bit like a tapestry. So he's put a frieze around this one with acorns there on this one, there's birds on this one over here. And the pattern below is a very common medieval pattern. It's actually a financial pattern. And they used to use the same checkerboard. Can you see the checker? Just like a chessboard almost, but a checkerboard. They used to use the same pattern on cloths. And they used to move money around on the cloths. And they were able to multiply and divide and subtract everything on these cloths. And it's where we now get the term Chancellor of the Exchequer. We used to write cheques. We don't do that so much anymore, but you used to write cheques, and that's where that term comes from, that checkerboard financial pattern. Bear in mind again, this chap who built the tower was finance, it was money, because he was finance director of the Abbey, and he'd made his money obviously with the lands and things around here. Money was obviously important. Also on this wall, and I'm just going to point him out to you here, is an animal that you would never see. He's a unique animal. He comes from the Peterborough Bestiary. The Bestiary was a book of animals which was made in the scriptorium of Peterborough Abbey, and it had all sorts of animals in it. The animals, some were real animals, so you had lions and things. It's like they just had a pig. Oh, right. There were lions and other things, but this animal is like a unicorn or a dragon. It's a mythological animal. It's called a bonnicon. A bonnicon, yeah. Now the bonnicon has its horns going the wrong way round, so he cannot fight from the front. So he turns around and shoots flaming poo out of his bottom, and I'm afraid my archer here is standing far too close because he's going to get frazzled and covered with flaming poo, because this flaming poo apparently covers 6 hectares, which is huge. Yeah. Also, my lovely young man here, and I know he's a young man because he's got curly hair, he's standing too close as well. His shield isn't going to stop him from getting covered either. So you will never see another bodycorn. I don't think he is unique like dragons, unicorns, but he does belong in the Peterborough Bestiary. So you'll have seen an animal that you'll never see again, I don't think. A bodycorn, it's called. Right. Any questions before we move on to... We eventually get to the religious walls. No? Okay. So let's turn and face this wall then. Yes.
I'm just curious about the type of material that they use in doing these paintings.
Yeah.
Because they last this long.
Yeah.
So near.
The ladies just asked about the type of material, the paints that they would use. A lot of them are earth paints, ochre and umber and things. They would grind up clays and other materials and bind it with egg yolk or oils, linseed and other oils, or they would grind very precious stones like azurite or lapis lazuli, and they would grind those and then mix them with oil. So if you wanted a really vivid blue, you would often use malachite, which is green, or azurite, which is blue. Yes. Okay.
Multiple choice.
Okay, so don't miss when you're looking this beautiful little bird here feeding her chicks, which I just think is lovely. And this lovely tracery, every inch of these walls are covered. And then over the archway, we have the 12 months of the year. Well, we would have had them. Unfortunately, a lot of them have gone. But there are 12 months of the year in the ordinary Gregorian calendar. And we start with January. Okay, down here. It's jolly cold. You can see the gentleman sat, or farmer I should say, probably sat on a three-legged stool. He's got a brazier. He can't afford a chimney. He's just warming his hands on a brazier. And he's got a bowl of pottage. So he's eating, it's like a thick soup, basically, perhaps with a little bit of meat in, mainly vegetable. And it's warm enough that he's thrown his hat onto his back there. Can you see his hat there? So he's representing January. There's not a lot you can do in January out on the farm. You sit and try to keep yourself as warm as you possibly can. February, probably doing something outside, starting to look at the fields, starting to think about sowing, but we've lost most of him with the falls of plaster. But March, you can definitely see clearly, he's digging. He has got his foot on a spade. Now, it is difficult to see, but if you look really, really carefully, just round the rim of that wooden spade is actually a metal rim to make it a little bit easier to dig. Because the soil round here is very, very clayey. It's difficult to dig. It's wet, it's damp. And he has had to hoist his gown up into his belt. Can you see he's tucked his gown up? And he's got sort of long overshoes on, coming right up over his thigh, held up by sort of suspender. Trying to keep his feet dry. So that is March. April, he would be again sowing or something like that. And then we've lost them all because of the falls of plaster until we get right round to December here. And can you see what he might be doing in December at all? Can you see that there? That is the back of a hog or pig. And this gentleman here is standing with his legs akimbo like this, and he's just about to poleaxe the back of the hog. And again, I will send you round. You find them all over the place in medieval scriptures and books. There's 12 months of the year represented in different ways in the farming calendar. But that the 12th month, December, is nearly always represented by killing a pig or a hog for the Christmas feast. So obviously at Christmas, most important time, or one of the most important times of the year, and they would be using everything of that pig, salting the meat so that it lasts, keeping the blood, ham, everything. You know what they say about pigs? You can eat everything but its squeak. Okay. So below there, we have the first of our religious paintings. Now bear in mind, obviously, for Robert de Thorpe and his family, his religion, his Christian faith would be absolutely paramount, and there are lots of religious iconography here in the tower. But here we have a saint, a hermit saint, St. Anthony Abbot, who is the patron saint of weavers, those who weave either carpets or baskets. And here you have somebody actually making a basket out of hazel, or possibly willow. There's great debate. We have scholars from all over the world come here, and there's a lot of debate as to whether this is a hazel basket or a willow basket that he's making, sat on his cushion there, this gentleman here. St. Anthony Abbot is praying, if you can see here, with his hands. And here, you can't see it very well, but there was Christ's head in the clouds. And the Latin inscription, which could be read in the 1950s, it can't be read now, unfortunately. In the Latin inscription, St. Anthony Abbot asked Christ, "What is the way to salvation?" And the reply comes from Christ, "The way to salvation is through work and prayer." You have the man working here, making his willow baskets, and you have the erect figure here praying with rosary beads. So the way to salvation is through work and prayer. The other bits here on this, there's a lovely sort of picture here of pollarded trees. Now I don't know if when you've driven into Peterborough, but so if you go along the riverbanks, you will see willow trees which are cut right down so that the withes grow over so that they can make baskets. And basket making was a big trade round here, not just because the medieval people had to carry everything in baskets, but also because they made things like eel traps for the river, fish traps, duck traps, all sorts of things. Basket making was a very big thing around here. And St. Anthony Abbot is a very unusual saint to have on your wall. Most churches would have the more common saints, so you get St. Catherine, Mary the Mother of Jesus, you get the Crucifixion, or you get the Nativity, you sometimes get St. Margaret, who is the patron saint of women in childbirth, quite a lot of, and St. Christopher, of course, who carried the child Jesus across the river, but rarely do you get St. Anthony Abbot.
Yeah.
So, it may be that saint was a special saint for the Thorpe family. Maybe that they made their money originally because they had been serfs only 50 years earlier, and they'd bought their way out of serfdom by perhaps making extra money making baskets. Or possibly, this St. Anthony Abbot is also the patron saint of something called St. Anthony's Fire. St. Anthony's Fire is a very nasty skin disease. It burns the skin, and it was quite common in medieval times. They used to get it by eating rye, which had a fungus infection on it, and they'd get this St. Anthony's Fire. So again, it may be somebody in the family had St. Anthony's Fire, and he was praying to get rid of that. But so that's the first of our religious paintings there. Below there we have another pseudo tapestry, but not a religious painting below. Anybody want to guess what that bird is in the middle?
Pigeon.
Owl. Somebody said owl. Owl. Very good. The symbol of
Strength. Night owl.
wisdom.
Studying.
Wisdom. Yeah. And we have a doctor or professor or on this side. I know that because of that funny hat he's wearing, a doctor or professor, and that he's got a long beard, which means he's an intellectual or old in medieval art, and he's teaching a clean-shaven student on the other side, so a young man. And this is the tree of knowledge in between. So we've got a doctor or professor teaching a young student. Some people believe that this is Aristotle himself. Bear in mind that it would then balance with the Aristotle of the Wheel of the Five Senses, teaching his most famous student. Alexander the Great. Now, Alexander the Great was held up by the medieval kings to be the greatest king. And if you look, the king over here is actually looking down at this figure here, who was held up to be the greatest king. So it may well be that this is Aristotle and Alexander the Great. But it could be any old doctor or professor teaching any old student. But it does say to us that Robert de Thorpe thought education also was very, very important. So we've got money, we've got education, we've got religion. Yeah? And now let's move to this other wall, which again says much more about his faith. Okay? Just do sit down again, I'll just turn the chairs around. Okay. So on this wall, we have a lot of nature. There's underneath here some wonderful birds and things. Don't miss them when you're having a look. There's curlews and herons and other native birds that will be around at the time. But the main thing, running round as are trees all the way round, starting in this corner and running all the way round, in and out, right up to the very end there, are the apostles. Well, actually more than the apostles, because we start off in this corner with St. Paul, who wasn't an apostle but was a founder of the early church. And then we go on to St. Peter, holding the keys of the kingdom, the keys of heaven. St. Andrew, who has his saltire because he was crucified upside down. St. James, with his pilgrim's shell, because he was the great pilgrim, the great traveller, and went supposedly to Santiago de Compostela. And then all the other apostles, in and out, all the way along, until Matthias at the very end here replaces Judas. And coming from their shoulder is a scroll on each. Yeah? And that scroll contains in Latin, in short form Latin, the Apostles' Creed. In other words, credo in Deo, credo in unum Deo, I believe in one God, the Father Almighty. The whole of the Apostles' Creed is on that wall. So again, that's the main tenet of the Catholic faith, the Christian faith, and it's here on the wall. Until we get to this one, now bear in mind that they've all got a halo. You can see their halos, yeah? Probably picked out in gold leaf, which again, when you've got no electricity and you're lighting everything with brushes and things, it must have looked wonderful, mustn't it? Glinting. But this one is slightly different to the others. Now, as you can see, they've all got beards. Yeah? I don't know about St. James, I'm not so sure. He's certainly got white hair, St. James. But most of them have got beards. This one, it's a woman. Now, but it is not Mary Magdalene, and it is not Mary, the mother of Christ. This is a woman representing Holy Mother Church, because it's the part of the Apostles' Creed which says, I believe in the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints. And the reason they did that was because this woman, they always call it Mother Church, so it's a female, and it should have been St. Matthew there. But St. Matthew is also an evangelist, a gospel writer, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And they are up here, highest to heaven. You can just see the outline of their cartouches. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, with their symbols, are up there as the four evangelists. They didn't want to put St. Matthew in twice, that would have sort of elevated him above St. Peter and St. Paul. So they replaced him with a woman to represent Holy Mother Church. So we've got the evangelists, the four gospel writers up there, and we've got all the apostles here as well. Okay? We've also got the nativity scene, of course. Just above the archway there, quite clearly, Mary suckling or holding the baby Jesus in swaddling bands. You can actually see the bands. And St. Joseph on the other side. The ox and the ass, just unfortunate because that fall apart is different, but you can just see an ox and an ass on either side. Now, in the medieval calendar, these were always put in on couches or cane chairs, not on straw or stones or anything. This is how it's always drawn in medieval art. So a lovely nativity scene. Above there, we have the 7 ages of man. Baby, little boy playing with a top and ball. Can you see he's got a sort of a whip here to sort of spin a top and ball? A teenager. Well, he's gone out. We don't know what he's doing. Probably playing on his computer or something, or up in his bedroom. Got no idea about the teenager. But this more mature man, we can definitely see, is hawking. Hawking was a very popular sport amongst the gentry. A falcon or a merlin, hold it on your arm, and these little things down here, they're tied to the legs of the falcon, so when they fly, they have to come back. And these little hats, these little hats they have to put on over their heads to keep them quiet. So hawking. And then the soldier, you can quite clearly see with his sword hanging down by his side.
Yeah.
The older man here with money bags, we think, holding, which again may tell you something about the people here. And finally, the old man, long beard, cane, and it says in Latin, there's a Latin inscription under each of them, but you probably can only just possibly read that. It says decrepitus. So in other words, towards the very end of your life, decrepitude, you know, you can't walk, you can't see. And Shakespeare quotes the 7 ages of man some 200 years later, and he says, without eyes, without teeth, without anything.
Yeah,
So-
nothing.
Okay, so
Where do we go now?
just want to have a look up at the ceiling. I told you up there was the 4 gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, but also up there are what could be angels playing musical instruments. Now over here, there are some mirrors. If you don't like looking up, please do use a mirror. Over there is King David, the great king of the Old Testament, the great psalmist. And Psalm 150 says, sing out your praises to the Lord. And then it lists a whole load of musical instruments to sing out your praises to the Lord. With the harp, with the psaltery. Psaltery was an instrument a bit like this one, which you plucked with your fingers, and you can see he's plucking it with his fingers there, or you could use a quill. Eventually it ends up as a piano, but you know, that's a long way on. This one here is
Do you want to see?
a T-bar of bells, little bells. It's called a cymbalum. Cymbalum. And this one you can quite see is portable pipes. You can see, can you see it's like a portable organ, portable pipes?
Yes.
This one here is this, the tabor, the drum and little pipe. Again, I'll pass that round. You have to play it at the same time, so you're beating the rhythm with the drum and playing the pipe at the same time. Very difficult to do, but I have seen it being done. This one here looks a bit like a violin, but it's held further down, and the bow is more bowed. It's called a rebec, and it comes from the Crusades. The Crusaders brought it back. It's an Arabian instrument. They, 200 years before, had been on the Crusades, and they brought back that instrument, and here it is on an English wall, which I think is lovely. And finally, this one here are bagpipes. You can just see the fluty bit, and they would have had the bag under. Yeah. So here, this sort of thing, bagpipes.